The year is 490 BC. You're standing on Marathon Beach watching 600 Persian warships arrive. 25,000 professional soldiers pour onto the sand. You have 10,000 men, mostly farmers. That's 2.5 enemies for every Greek. The Persian Empire rules 50 million people. Athens has 150,000 souls. Yet in 3 hours, 6,400 Persians will be dead. You'll lose only 192 men. One general's insane gamble will change Western civilization forever. Without this battle, democracy dies here. Everything you know about the modern world never happens. Here's what they don't teach you in school. Athens wasn't some mighty power. Their democracy was only 18 years old, younger than a teenager, and already hanging by a thread. They had no professional army, no standing military force, just citizens who trained a few weeks per year. Most of these men were farmers who'd saved for years to buy their bronze armor. Their shields were family heirlooms passed down through generations. They were commanded by 10 generals who rotated daily command in some bizarre democratic experiment that made coherent military strategy nearly impossible. The city treasury was nearly bankrupt from recent wars. Their walls were decent but couldn't withstand a sustained siege by the force now landing on their beaches. Facing them stood King Darius I of Persia, who called himself King of Kings, king of the 4 corners of the world, and he wasn't exaggerating. His empire stretched from India to Egypt, from the Mediterranean to the edges of the known world. 50 million subjects paid him tribute. His immortals, 10,000 elite warriors, called that because whenever one fell, he was immediately replaced, had never been defeated in living memory. His cavalry was the finest on earth, a mobile killing force that had crushed every enemy it encountered. His navy fielded 600 triremes, each carrying 200 men. Every Greek city that had resisted Persian conquest had been burned to ash, their population sold into slavery or worse. Darius hadn't come on a whim. 10 years earlier, Athens had made a catastrophic mistake. They'd supported the Ionian Greeks when they revolted against Persian rule. Those rebels had burned the Persian administrative center at Sardis. Darius took this personally. Legend says he had a servant whisper, "Remember Athens," at every meal. This wasn't just military strategy. This was vengeance. The Persians had already conquered northern Greek cities with barely a fight. They expected Athens to surrender the moment their fleet appeared. Inside Athens, the emergency assembly had devolved into chaos. The debate raged for hours. Surrender and hope for mercy? Evacuate the city entirely? Wait behind the walls? Women and children were being loaded onto ships bound for the island of Salamis. The wealthy were already fleeing with their gold. The treasury was being hidden. A desperate message went to Sparta begging for help. The Spartan response came back like a death sentence. "We'll come after the full moon." That was 6 days away. 6 days Athens didn't have. Inside the command tent at Marathon, the war council of 10 generals was deadlocked. 5 voted to wait for the Spartans behind Athens' walls. 5 voted to attack immediately. The tie-breaking vote belonged to Callimachus, the polemarch, essentially the war archon. He wasn't a military genius. He was a politician thrust into command by democratic rotation. One general named Miltiades stepped forward with an argument that would echo through 2,500 years. Every hour we wait, more Persians land on our beaches. Every day we hesitate, more Greek cities surrender without a fight. If we wait, we're already defeated. Our only chance is to attack now, before they're fully prepared, before their cavalry can position. Callimachus looked at this general, looked at the impossible odds, and made a choice. He voted to attack. Then Miltiades revealed a plan so insane that even the generals who'd voted with him thought he'd lost his mind. The standard Greek tactic was a slow, disciplined advance in phalanx formation, shields locked, spears forward, moving like a human wall. Miltiades proposed something no Greek army had ever attempted. They would charge at a full sprint, running 200 yards straight at the enemy. The objections came immediately. Men in 70 pounds of bronze armor can't run 200 yards. They'll collapse from heat stroke before reaching Persian lines. The formation will break apart, will arrive disorganized and be slaughtered. Miltiades stood firm. If we walk, we spend 2 minutes under arrow fire. Half of us die before we ever touch their lines. If we run, we're under arrows for maybe 30 seconds. We'll lose men, but we'll reach them with enough strength to fight. Meanwhile, Persian commanders on the beach were making their fatal mistake. They looked at the Greek position in the foothills and scoffed at the numbers. They decided to split their forces. Persian military doctrine relied on cavalry to break enemy formations. Then infantry would finish the job. Their plan was brilliant and efficient. Load the cavalry and part the infantry back onto ships. Sail around Cape Sinai to Athens. Attack the undefended city from the sea, while the infantry at Marathon pinned down or destroyed the Greek army. It was a perfect plan with one fatal flaw. They assumed the Greeks would never attack first. Every Greek army in Persian experience had fought defensively. For 5 days, both armies stared at each other across the plain. Greeks camped in the foothills, Persians on the beach near their ships. Each day, Greek scouts reported the same thing. More ships leaving, more cavalry embarking. On the morning of August 12th, Miltiades woke his fellow generals with electrifying news. The cavalry is gone. They're sailing to Athens right now. This is our moment. We attack today or Athens falls undefended. What happened next defied every principle of military science. Miltiades formed the Greek phalanx, but with a tactical innovation no one had seen before. The standard formation was 8 men deep across the entire line. Miltiades extended the wings, stretching his line to match the Persian front. To do this, he weakened his center to only 4 men deep, dangerously thin by any standard. But he made his wings 12 men deep, unusually strong and concentrated. His fellow generals saw the formation and understood immediately what he was planning. Let the Persians crush our center. When they push forward thinking they're winning, the wings will close in from both sides like a trap. It was brilliant. It was also insane. If the center broke too quickly, if the wings couldn't go inward fast enough, the entire army would be destroyed. The night before battle, the Greeks could see Persian campfires spread across the plain like stars falling to earth. Someone counted the fires and did the mathematics. 25,000 at minimum, possibly 30,000. Against their 10,000. Soldiers wrote final letters to their families. Some vomited from fear. Others prayed at makeshift altars. A few deserted in the darkness, and no one blamed them. The odds were that hopeless. At dawn, Miltiades gave his final speech, later recorded by survivors and passed down through Herodotus. Men, today you choose between slavery and freedom. Your children will either grow up as Persians or as Greeks. When I give the signal, you will run like your family's lives depend on it, because they do. Some of you will fall under Persian arrows. Some will die on Persian spears. But if we falter, if we hesitate, if we fail, Athens burns. Your wives become slaves. Your daughters become property. Your sons will bow to Persian masters. So when you run like you're racing death itself. The army formed up at first light, 10,000 men in bronze that caught the rising sun and turned them into a river of fire. Across the plain, Persian commanders watched with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. The Greeks were actually forming for battle. These fools were going to attack. Persian officers began forming their lines almost casually. This would be over quickly. Here's what military historians still can't fully explain. These Greek soldiers, mostly farmers and craftsmen, were about to attempt something that modern military experiments have proven should be nearly impossible. Running 200 yards and 70 pounds of armor in September heat that was still near 90 degrees. After sleeping poorly from fear, after days of short rations and stress, should result in mass collapse from heat exhaustion. Yet they were about to do exactly that. At 8 a.m., Miltiades raised a spear. 10,000 men began walking forward in perfect formation. At 300 yards, Persian archers knocked their arrows. At 250 yards, Miltiades screamed a word that would change history. Dramos! Run! The entire Greek line, 10,000 men in bronze, broke into a full sprint toward 25,000 enemies. The Persian reaction was complete paralysis. No army in their experience, no force they'd ever faced, had charged their lines at a full run. For precious seconds, Persian archers simply froze, trying to process what they were seeing. Their commander started screaming orders, but those seconds of hesitation cost them everything. When the arrows finally came, they came in clouds so thick that survivors later said they blocked the sun. Greeks ran with shields overhead, the sound of bronze-tipped arrows hitting bronze shields like hail on a metal roof. Men fell, arrows finding gaps in armor, punching through where shoulder met chest, where helmet met neck. But most arrows bounced or stuck in shields, and the Greeks kept running. At 100 yards, something impossible was happening. Men in 70 pounds of armor were still running, still maintaining formation, still coming like an avalanche of bronze and rage. Persian horses started backing up despite their riders' efforts. Animals sensed doom, and doom was thundering toward them at full speed. The Greeks were screaming their war cry, alala, a sound like thunder mixed with the roar of some ancient beast. At 50 yards, the Persian front line visibly buckled. Soldiers in the front ranks pushed backward into the ranks behind them. Officers screamed commands nobody could hear over the sound of 10,000 men in armor running, screaming, coming like the wrath of gods. Then impact. The crash was heard across the entire plain. Greek spears, 12 feet of ash wood tipped with iron, punched through linen armor like it was paper. Shields weighing 15 pounds each slammed into bodies with the force of battering rams. The first 3 ranks of Persians simply ceased to exist, crushed under the momentum of the charge. But the Persians were professionals, trained from childhood, and they fought back. In the center, exactly as Miltiades predicted, the elite Persian infantry began pushing the thin Greek line backward. The Greeks in the center, only 4 men deep, were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Persian commanders saw this and made their fatal mistake. They pushed forward, committing more troops to exploit the breakthrough. Thinking they were winning, they pursued what they thought was a fleeing Greek center. By 8:20 a.m., they'd pushed 30 yards forward, then 50 yards, separating themselves from their own flanks. Meanwhile, on both wings, the Greek heavy formations, 12 men deep with fresh fighters, had completely destroyed the Persian flanks. Those Persian units broke and ran, and the Greek wings, instead of pursuing, did something that required iron discipline. They wheeled inward, turning 90 degrees, and began marching toward the Persian center. The Persians who pushed forward suddenly realized they were surrounded on 3 sides. Greeks to their left, Greeks to their right. Greeks were forming in front. Behind them, the only escape route was the sea. The realization spread through Persian ranks like ice water. This wasn't a victory. It was a trap. The Persian formation collapsed all at once. Elite soldiers who'd never known defeat simply ran. They threw down weapons, shed armor, anything to move faster. The beach became a slaughterhouse. By 8:30 a.m., battle had become massacre. Greek hoplites were trained for exactly this. Close combat with spears and shields in tight spaces. Persians were trained for mobile warfare, cavalry charges, archery from distance. In close quarters on a crowded beach, the Greeks were unstoppable. Persians reached the water's edge and kept running, plunging into the surf. Many threw off their armor and tried to swim for the ships. Greek spears followed them into the waves. The water turned red. So many sources confirm this that it's not poetic exaggeration. Ships began pushing off early, leaving men behind. Soldiers tried to swim after vessels already 20, 30 yards from shore. Some Greeks waded into the water, trying to capture ships. One soldier named Synagirus grabbed a ship's stern ornament. A Persian sailor brought an axe down on his hand, severing it. Synagirus grabbed with his other hand. They cut that off too. According to witnesses, he tried to hold on with his teeth before finally being killed. He became a legend that day. The Greeks captured 7 ships. By 9:30 a.m., the battlefield went quiet except for the screams of the wounded. Greeks stood in groups, exhausted, disbelieving, looking around at what they'd accomplished. Herodotus, who interviewed survivors decades later, wrote that they stood amazed at what they had done, as if watching someone else's victory. The count came in over the next hour. Persian dead, 6,400. Greek dead, 192. That a ratio of 33 to 1. It remains one of the most one-sided major battles in recorded history. But the celebration was cut brutally short. Someone remembered the Persian cavalry. They'd taken ships toward Athens that morning. The city was undefended. All the women and children evacuated to Salamis could be trapped if Persians landed first. If the Persian fleet reached Athens before the Greek army could march back, everything they'd just won would be lost. Miltiades made an instant decision. We march to Athens. Now, no rest, no food, no water. Now, these men had just fought for 90 minutes in bronze armor in 90-degree heat. Many were wounded. All were exhausted. And Miltiades was ordering them to march 26 miles back to Athens before the Persian fleet could sail 60 miles around Cape Sunion. It was another impossible demand in a day of impossible achievements. But there was one man who didn't march with the army. Pheidippides was a professional herald, a trained runner who'd already run 150 miles to Sparta and back just 3 days earlier. He was already exhausted. Miltiades looked at him and gave the order that would create a legend lasting 2,500 years. Run ahead. Warn Athens we're coming. Tell them we won. Pheidippides, still wearing his armor, took off running. 26 miles of rough terrain, uphill and down, through summer heat, already past the point of exhaustion. Behind him, 10,000 men began their forced march, the second impossible physical feat of the day. Pheidippides reached Athens around 1 p.m., bursting into the Agora marketplace. He gasped out one word, Nike, victory, then described the battle and warned that Persian ships were coming. Multiple sources say he collapsed immediately. Later romanticized versions claim he died on the spot, though this is likely embellishment. But his warning saved Athens. Word spread through the city like wildfire. The Persians were beaten, but they were still coming. By 3 p.m., something impossible happened for the second time that day. The Greek army reached Athens. They'd marched 26 miles in roughly 5 hours while wearing armor and carrying weapons. Modern military force marches struggle to match that pace with modern equipment. These men did it after fighting a battle. They immediately took positions on the cliffs overlooking the harbor at Phaleron, still in their battle armor, still covered in blood and dust, looking absolutely terrifying. At 4 p.m., the Persian fleet rounded Cape Sunion. Their commanders looked toward Athens and saw the Greek army waiting on the cliffs above the harbor. The same army they thought they'd left at Marathon. The same soldiers who just killed 6,400 Persians. The psychological impact was devastating. How could they be here? The Persians should still be at Marathon, or they'd marched. They should be hours behind, exhausted and scattered. Yet there they stood, formed up, ready for battle. The Persian admirals held a brief conference aboard the flagship. They had no cavalry with them. Those forces were still on transport ships. They'd be landing infantry onto a beach against an army that held the high ground, an army that had just achieved the impossible twice in one day. The decision came quickly. The fleet turned and sailed for home. From the walls of Athens, thousands watched the Persian sails disappear over the horizon. The city erupted. Church bells that didn't exist yet in that form. But every instrument of celebration rang out. Festivals lasted 3 days. The 192 dead were buried with the highest honors in a tomb at Marathon that still stands today. Each man's name was inscribed in stone. But the real reckoning came in Persia. King Darius I received the news of Marathon like a physical blow. His invincible army, the force that had conquered nations, had been routed by Greek farmers. 6,400 of his soldiers dead. 7 ships captured. The entire invasion force fled back to Persia in humiliation. For a man who called himself King of Kings, who had a servant remind him daily to remember Athens, this wasn't just a military defeat. It was personal humiliation on a scale he'd never experienced. Darius immediately began planning a much larger invasion. This wouldn't be 25,000 men. Next time he'd bring 100,000, maybe more. He'd personally lead the invasion. Athens would burn so thoroughly that not even ruins would remain. But Darius died in 486 BC, for years after Marathon, before he could launch his revenge. His son Xerxes inherited the obsession along with the throne. The Spartans arrived at Marathon 3 days after battle, having finally completed their religious obligations. They marched on the battlefield and walked among 6,400 Persian corpses in stunned silence. These were Spartans, the most feared warriors in Greece, legendary for their skill and courage. They were amazed at what Athens had accomplished alone. Their king reportedly said, "Athens has proven itself worthy." This respect would prove crucial 10 years later, when Xerxes returned with his massive invasion force. The Spartans would stand at Thermopylae, the Athenians would win at Salamis, and Greece would survive. But none of that happens without Marathon's confidence. Now, let me reveal the 3 secrets that made the impossible possible. First, the terrain. The Marathon plain is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides with only narrow passes. This meant Persian cavalry, their primary tactical advantage, had no good route to leave except by ship. Miltiades, who traveled extensively in the region, understood this. He waited 5 days, watching those ships load cavalry and depart. Without their cavalry, the Persians lost the very thing that made their army unstoppable. Greek heavy infantry against Persian infantry alone meant Greek victory was actually probable, not impossible. The Persians never understood the local geography cost them everything. Second, the missing cavalry. Persian battle doctrine for 50 years had been the same. Cavalry breaks the enemy formation. Infantry finishes them. Against heavy Greek armor and shields, infantry alone couldn't break the phalanx. The Persian decision to split their forces, loading cavalry onto ships to attack Athens, meant they fought the one battle they couldn't win. Miltiades didn't create this opportunity. He simply had the genius to recognize it and the courage to seize it immediately. Third, the physical impossibility that wasn't. Modern military studies have replicated the charge in period-accurate armor. The conclusion is that it's possible barely, with maximum adrenaline and excellent conditioning. But these were farmers and craftsmen. How could they be in that condition? The answer reveals something profound about Greek culture. Every Greek citizen trained regularly in the gymnasium. Athletics weren't just entertainment, they were civic duty. The Olympic Games, already 300 years old by Marathon, celebrated this culture. These farmers could run in armor because Greek culture had been preparing them their entire lives. That cultural practice, that emphasis on physical excellence, saved Western civilization. The long-term impact of Marathon staggers the imagination. Athens became the leading Greek power, not Sparta. The confidence from Marathon led directly to Athens' golden age. Pericles, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the playwrights, the architects, all of it flowed from the confidence that Marathon provided. Democracy, proven effective in its greatest test, spread to other Greek cities. If Athens had lost, if Callimachus had voted to wait, if Miltiades hadn't seen his opportunity, Western civilization as we know it dies on that beach. The modern marathon race, 26.2 miles, commemorates Pheidippides' run from Marathon to Athens. Every marathon runner in history has been unknowingly honoring that desperate dash 2,500 years ago. In 1896, when Greece hosted the first modern Olympics, they created the marathon race specifically to celebrate ancient Greek achievement. The distance was standardized at 26.2 miles, the distance from Marathon to Athens. But here's the final irony that makes Marathon's legacy so complex. The victory only bought Greece 10 years. Xerxes returned in 480 BC with a force so large it took 7 days to cross the Hellespont. He burned Athens to the ground. Everything Marathon saved was destroyed. Yet by then, the Greeks were united and prepared. They had 10 years to build alliances, fortify positions, and construct the navy that won at Salamis. Without Marathon, that preparation never happens. Without Marathon's proof that Persians could be beaten, the Greeks surrender without fighting. Marathon didn't save Greece permanently. It bought time and built confidence, which ultimately did save Greece. In the end, Marathon stands as eternal proof that mathematics doesn't always determine outcomes. 10,000 defeated 25,000 not because they were stronger, but because they were fighting for their homes, their families, their right to govern themselves. One general saw one opportunity when his enemy made one mistake, and he had the courage to seize it. One official cast one vote to attack instead of wait, and that vote changed the trajectory of human civilization. That's the marathon secret. Freedom is always one battle away from extinction, and sometimes, when people are willing to run 200 yards into certain death for what they believe in, 10,000 is enough.